There is a very specific kind of pain that can quietly take over your mind. It is not the pain of a clean rejection. Not even close. Rejection can hurt, but at least it is honest. It gives you shape. It tells you where you stand. Silence is different. Ignoring you is different. When someone does not answer, does not text back, does not make time, does not seem to notice your effort, your nervous system starts inventing stories. And that is when people lose themselves, because the human mind does not handle ambiguity well. It can survive bad news better than unclear news. If you know someone is gone, you can grieve. If you know someone does not want you, you can begin to detach. But when they are half present, when they leave little crumbs of attention, when they make you feel almost chosen and almost seen, your brain keeps reaching. It keeps hoping. It keeps trying to solve what is actually not a puzzle at all. And that is the trap. You think you are chasing a person, but often you are chasing relief. You are chasing closure. You are chasing the moment your mind can finally relax and say, okay, now I know where I stand. But the cruelest part is this. The more you chase someone who ignores you, the more you train your own mind to believe that your value depends on their response. That is how people begin to disappear inside of relationships before the relationship even really exists. You start checking your phone more than you check yourself. You start analyzing every word, every delay, every emoji, every change in tone. You start asking friends for interpretations as if one more opinion will finally make the silence make sense. You become obsessed with details because you no longer trust your own perception. And meanwhile, the other person is not thinking about you nearly as much as you think about them. That realization stings, but it is liberating, because once you understand what is happening psychologically, you stop mistaking anxiety for love. You stop confusing pursuit with devotion. You stop believing that if you just explain yourself better, text at the right time, show more patience, or become a little more impressive, they will suddenly wake up and value you. That is usually not how it works. In fact, chasing often does the opposite of what you want. The more you reach, the more you lower the sense of scarcity, the more available you become, the less they feel they have to choose you. Not because you are unworthy, but because human beings respond to perceived value, effort, and distance in complicated ways. If someone senses that your attention is always there no matter how they behave, they unconsciously stop protecting it. This is one of the hardest truths in social dynamics. People often value what they have to be intentional about. That does not mean you should become cold or manipulative. It means your presence should not be something they can ignore without consequence. When someone ignores you and you keep over-explaining, over-giving, over-pursuing, you are not proving loyalty. You are often proving fear, and fear is not attractive. Fear says, please don't leave me. Confidence says, I know my worth, and I will not beg to be seen. There is a deep difference between being caring and being available to be drained. There is a difference between kindness and self-abandonment. When you chase someone who consistently ignores you, you are often sacrificing self-respect in exchange for the possibility of being selected. That exchange is never worth it, because what you are really teaching yourself in that moment is, my peace is negotiable if I can just get the right person to approve of me. That belief spreads into everything. It changes how you speak. It changes how you tolerate disrespect. It changes the kind of people you allow into your life. You begin to normalize emotional inconsistency. And once that becomes familiar, calm connection can feel boring. Healthy people can even feel less exciting because your nervous system has started to confuse instability with chemistry. That is one of the reasons people get attached to those who ignore them. The chaos feels intense. The uncertainty creates spikes of dopamine. Your brain loves prediction errors, those tiny jolts when something unexpected happens, a late reply, a sudden compliment, a random sign of interest after days of silence. These things can hook you harder than steady affection ever could. The brain is weird like that. It becomes more interested when rewards are unpredictable. That is the same mechanism that makes gambling addictive. You pull the lever again because maybe this time you'll win. You send one more text because maybe this time they'll answer differently. You check one more time because maybe this time the silence will break. But emotional gambling always ends the same way. You lose more than you gain. And the more you keep trying, the more you stop noticing the cost. Your self-esteem begins bleeding out slowly, one ignored message at a time. That is why people wake up one day and realize they have become a version of themselves they no longer recognize. Not because they were weak, but because they stayed too long in a dynamic that kept asking them to shrink. You do not need to hate the person to let go. You do not need to write a dramatic final message. You do not need to win the situation. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop feeding your attention into a place that gives you nothing in return. That is not punishment. That is discernment. And the strange thing is, the moment you stop chasing, your entire internal state starts changing. At first, it feels unnatural. Your body may panic. You may feel the urge to check, to double text, to create an excuse, to reopen the conversation, to just make sure everything is okay. But what is really happening is that your attachment system is resisting withdrawal. Your mind is used to chasing. It mistakes the absence of pursuit for danger. So you have to understand something very important. Just because you feel the urge to reach out does not mean reaching out is wise. Sometimes the urge is simply your anxiety asking for a hit. The adult response is not to obey every emotional impulse. The adult response is to observe it, breathe through it, and let it pass without turning it into action. That is where emotional intelligence begins. Not in perfect control, but in awareness. You start seeing the gap between what you feel and what you should do. You stop making every feeling into a command. You realize that not every connection deserves your effort, and not every silence deserves your interpretation. Some people are not confused. They are just not invested. Some people are not busy. They are making a choice. Some people are not bad at texting. They are simply not prioritizing you. That truth can hurt, but it can also set you free, because once you stop romanticizing inconsistency, you begin to see patterns more clearly. You notice that some people only appear when it suits them. They enjoy the comfort of your attention without the responsibility of reciprocity. They like being thought of more than they like showing up. They want access to your energy, your care, your patience, your presence, but not the mutual effort that real connection requires. And if you were honest, you have probably ignored this longer than you should have because you were hoping the potential was real. That is another quiet reason people chase. They fall in love with potential because potential does not disappoint immediately. A person's actual behavior can be disappointing, but their potential is infinite. In your imagination, they can become more attentive, more loving, more consistent, more emotionally mature. In your imagination, you can still be chosen. In your imagination, the whole story can still turn around. But reality does not reward imagination. Reality rewards what people do repeatedly. And this is where Stoic wisdom becomes so powerful. The old philosophers understood that pain multiplies when you try to control what is not yours to control. You cannot force interest. You cannot force respect. You cannot force someone to miss you in the way you miss them. You cannot negotiate emotional availability out of someone who only wants you on their terms. What is in your control is your response. That is the part most people avoid because the response requires dignity. It requires patience. It requires letting go of the fantasy that you can be so lovable, so understanding, so perfect, that someone else will suddenly become the person you needed them to be all along. But this is the strange paradox. The more you stop trying to convince the wrong people, the more you become available to the right ones. And I do not just mean romantically. This is about your entire presence. The way you carry yourself changes when you stop begging for attention from people who are emotionally lazy. Your voice changes. Your posture changes. Your energy stops leaking. You no longer enter rooms asking, will they approve of me? You enter wondering, is this even a place that deserves me? That shift is enormous because people feel when you no longer chase their approval. They may not say it, but they feel it. Your silence begins to have weight. Your absence begins to matter. Your attention becomes something that must be earned, not expected, and suddenly the dynamic changes. But here is where it gets even more interesting. Sometimes the real reason you keep chasing is not because you truly want the person. It is because they're ignoring you activates an old wound in you. It touches the part of you that learned long ago that love must be earned, attention is unstable, and being chosen is never guaranteed. So when someone goes quiet, they are not just one person ignoring you. In your body, it can feel like every past experience of being overlooked is happening again at once. That is why this topic is never just about texting, dating, or mixed signals. It goes deeper than that, much deeper. And once you see that deeper layer, the whole pattern begins to reveal itself in a way most people never notice. It is not really about them at all. It is about what their distance awakens in you. For many people, being ignored does not simply feel disappointing. It feels destabilizing. The body reads it as a threat. Your heart rate changes. Your focus narrows. Your mind becomes hypervigilant. You start scanning for signs of life the way a thirsty person scans the horizon for water. This is not weakness, it is biology. The nervous system is built to track connection because for most of human history, social exclusion meant danger. Be left out by the group once meant vulnerability. To be unwanted once meant reduced protection, fewer resources, less survival. So even now, in a modern world full of phones and social media, the ancient brain still reacts to silence as if something important is being taken away. That is why ignoring someone can create such a powerful emotional response. It activates primal circuitry, can produce the same kind of pain pathways associated with physical discomfort. The brain does not fully separate social rejection from bodily threat. That is why it hurts in your chest, your stomach, your throat. Your body is not being dramatic. It is interpreting disconnection as danger. And if your history taught you that love is inconsistent, then that danger gets amplified. Maybe you had to earn attention growing up. Maybe affection came unpredictably. Maybe you were praised when you performed, noticed when you were useful, and overlooked when you were simply being yourself. In that case, chasing people who ignore you may not be a habit you chose. It may be a pattern you inherited. Your younger self learned that distance means try harder, and now your adult self keeps repeating that instruction even when it damages you. That is why awareness matters so much. Because once you recognize the pattern, you stop treating every ignored message as a unique event. You begin to see the emotional script underneath it. You see how your mind turns uncertainty into obsession, how your ego turns silence into a challenge, how your wounded part turns unavailability into a mission. And missions are seductive. They make you feel purposeful even when they are destroying your peace. You think, if I can just get this person to see me, then I will finally feel worthy. But that is the trap hidden inside many pursuits. You are not always fighting for connection. Sometimes you are fighting for self-validation. You are trying to win the approval of someone who has become symbolic. They are no longer just a person. They are the gatekeeper to a story you have been telling yourself about your value. That is why letting go feels bigger than it should. You are not just releasing them. You are releasing the fantasy that their choice would heal something in you, but they cannot heal that part. No one can choose you in a way that replaces self-acceptance. If you need their response to feel whole, their silence will always feel catastrophic. If you depend on their attention to regulate your self-worth, then even a small delay can shake your identity. This is where people become emotionally hostage to breadcrumbs. A small compliment can revive hope. A brief reply can restart the addiction. A sudden sign of interest can make you forget weeks of neglect. You keep interpreting these tiny moments as evidence that the bond is alive, when in reality they may simply be keeping you emotionally hooked. Intermittent reinforcement is one of the most powerful psychological traps in human behavior, not because it is loving, but because it is unpredictable. The mind becomes especially attached when rewards are inconsistent. If someone gave you affection every time, it would be comfortable. If someone gave you nothing, it would eventually become clear. But when they alternate between warmth and withdrawal, your brain starts chasing the next reward with almost irrational intensity. That is how people end up attached to confusion, and confusion is expensive. It costs your time, your focus, your sleep, your confidence, your standards. It causes you to talk yourself out of your own instincts. Something feels off, but you keep hoping the next conversation will redeem the last one. The effort is one-sided, but you keep measuring your worth by whether they respond this time. You feel anxious around them, but you call it chemistry because naming the truth would require action. The truth is not that they are hard to get. The truth is that they are easy to lose yourself around. There's a profound difference between being interested in someone and becoming dysregulated by them. Healthy interest expands you. Obsession collapses you. Healthy attraction makes you more present. Chasing someone who ignores you makes you more anxious, more scattered, more self-conscious. And when you are in that state, your judgment gets distorted. You begin reading too much into small gestures while ignoring the pattern. You celebrate a single thoughtful message and erase a dozen disappointments. You give enormous meaning to a late-night text because your mind is starving for certainty. This is how emotional scarcity works. When attention is rare, even crumbs begin to look like a feast. But crumbs are still crumbs. If someone wanted to be in your life, you would not need to decode them like an encrypted message. Consistency is not mysterious. Real interest does not require constant detective work. People who value you make space for you in ways that are visible, repeatable, and unmistakable. This is one of the reasons Stoicism is so useful here. Not because Stoicism tells you to suppress emotion, but because it teaches you to distinguish between impression and truth. Your impression may be they are the one I need. The truth may be they are unavailable, and my attachment to them is hurting me. Stoicism asks a brutal but freeing question: what is the cost of your desire? If the cost is self-respect, then the desire has become too expensive. History is full of people who understood the power of restraint. Seneca warned that we suffer more in imagination than in reality, and nowhere is that more visible than in chasing someone who ignores you. You suffer first from the silence, then from the stories you build around it, then from the identity you create inside that story. You become someone waiting by the window of a life that is not coming back, and yet the strongest people are not the ones who never feel this pull. They are the ones who learn to sit in the discomfort without obeying it. That is the real work. Not pretending you do not care, not turning cold, not becoming cynical. The work is learning to let your care exist without handing over your dignity with it. Because there is a mature way to love, and there is a self-erasing way to love. The mature way says, I like you, but I will not chase what is not reaching toward me. The self-erasing way says, if I just try harder, maybe I can earn what should have been freely given. One preserves your center. The other slowly destroys it. And you can see this pattern everywhere once you learn how to look. In friendships where you are always the one initiating. In family dynamics where your worth is measured by how much you tolerate. In workplaces where being overextended is mistaken for being valuable. In romance where emotional unavailability is often disguised as depth, mystery, or intensity. We have romanticized people who make love feel difficult. We have made suffering seem meaningful. We have confused scarcity with significance. But ask yourself a simple question. If something genuinely nourishes you, does it need to exhaust you to prove its worth? Real connection should not feel like a constant audition, and yet many people live as if it must. They believe that if they become patient enough, understanding enough, desirable enough, the person who ignores them will finally transform. They mistake endurance for strength. They think waiting longer will make the dynamic more respectable. But waiting for someone to become consistent is often just a slower way of abandoning yourself. There is a quiet humiliation in repeatedly offering yourself to someone who keeps showing you that your place in their life is optional. The humiliation is not because you loved. The humiliation comes from staying when the evidence is clear. That is why self-awareness is such a turning point. It allows you to see your own attachment without shame. You stop asking, why am I like this? In a self-attacking way, and start asking, what inside me is being activated here. That shift matters because once you approach yourself with curiosity instead of contempt, you can actually change. And change begins with a decision that feels small but alters everything. You stop making your peace dependent on their behavior. You do not need their reply to breathe. You do not need their attention to remain valuable. You do not need their choice to justify your worth. The moment you stop treating their silence as a referendum on your value, the spell begins to break. But there is a final layer here that most people do not see until they have already suffered enough to look deeper. Because sometimes the person who ignores you is not just unavailable. Sometimes they are benefiting from your pursuit in ways you have not admitted to yourself yet. And once you see that everything changes easily, you begin to see that chasing is not always just a mistake. Sometimes it becomes part of the arrangement. Because if someone knows you will keep reaching no matter how little they give, then your pursuit becomes a kind of insurance. It tells them they can stay half present and still feel wanted. It tells them they can receive your energy without matching it. It tells them they can enjoy the comfort of being desired without paying the emotional cost of being consistent. That is a harsh thing to face, but it is necessary. Not everyone who ignores you is sitting there plotting your pain. Sometimes it is not even conscious. They may simply be emotionally lazy, avoidant, distracted, self-centered, or deeply immature. But whether it is deliberate or not, the effect is the same. Your continued chase rewards the very behavior that is hurting you. And that is where you have to become brutally honest with yourself. Because the moment you stop asking, why are they doing this? And start asking, why am I still participating? You move from victimhood into power. You stop organizing your life around their inconsistency and begin examining the part of you that keeps confusing scarcity for value. That part of you is important. It is not stupid. It is not weak. It is trying to protect you in the only way it knows how. It believes that if you can just win the attention of the unavailable person, then the old wound will finally close. But pain does not heal by repeating itself. A wound that keeps getting reopened does not become a scar. It stays a wound, so you have to stop touching what hurts. And yes, that includes the digital behaviors that seem harmless but are actually keeping you emotionally attached. The re-rating, the profile checking, the subtle stalking, the accidental hovering, the mental rehearsing of what you wish you had said. Every one of those acts keeps the bond alive in your nervous system even when the connection is dead in reality. You cannot detach from someone while secretly feeding on fragments of them. That is why people feel like they are going through withdrawal when they try to stop chasing. It is not just sentiment, it is neurochemistry. Your brain has been conditioned to expect stimulation from this person, and now it is protesting the absence of it. But protest is not proof. Just because your mind resists detachment does not mean the attachment is healthy. This is the moment where discipline becomes emotional freedom, not discipline in the punishing sense. Discipline is self-protection. Discipline as refusing to keep volunteering for pain. Discipline is saying, I do not need to win this person. I need to win myself back. That sentence changes everything because the real prize was never their attention. The real prize was your return to yourself, your calm, your clarity, your standards, your ability to sleep without wondering what a delay means, your ability to enjoy your day without measuring your worth through someone else's response time. When you begin to reclaim those things, something surprising happens. You stop romanticizing the very dynamics that were draining you. You see how much energy you spent trying to extract warmth from emotional coldness. You see how much of your life was arranged around uncertainty. You see how your mind became an employee of someone else's indecision. And the minute you see that clearly, the spell weakens. This is why silence can be such a powerful teacher. Not their silence toward you, but yours toward them. When you stop explaining, stop pursuing, stop performing, stop overinvesting in someone who has already shown you their limit, you create a new standard inside your own life. You teach your nervous system that absence is not an emergency. You teach your heart that being ignored is not a challenge to conquer. You teach your identity that peace is more important than proving your worth to a distracted person. That is not a small shift. That is identity work, because once you become the person who no longer chases neglect, your choices begin to reorganize around that truth. You no longer fall for promise without pattern. You no longer get seduced by occasional kindness in the presence of consistent disrespect. You no longer call emotional starvation. Oh, and yes, some people will be shocked by this version of you. They will notice when you stop overfunctioning for them. They will notice when you are not as accessible. They will notice when your energy is no longer freely available to anyone who asks for it. Some will try to pull you back with just enough attention to keep the old dynamic alive. That is often the test. Not a grand apology, not a dramatic confession. Just a subtle reappearance of the behavior that once kept you hooked. If you do not see the pattern clearly, you can be caught all over again. That is why the next level is not just leaving. It is recognizing the pattern fast enough that it no longer gets to name your reality. When someone has trained you to chase, the healing is not only about walking away once. It is about changing the inner reflex that says unavailability must be pursued. It is about teaching your mind that desire without reciprocity is not destiny. It is about no longer rewarding someone for making you feel uncertain, because uncertainty is not intimacy, intensity is not intimacy, pining is not intimacy, anxiety is not intimacy. Real intimacy is safe enough that you do not have to decipher it. And if that feels unfamiliar, that is exactly why you may have been drawn to the wrong people for so long. The nervous system often mistakes what is familiar for what is right. So if unpredictability was your early emotional language, stability can feel strange at first. It can even feel too quiet. But quiet is not emptiness. Sometimes quiet is peace finally arriving without drama. You do not need a chaotic bond to feel alive. You do not need to be ignored to become interesting. You do not need to shrink, chase, overperform, or audition for basic respect. You need to become intolerant of relationships that survive on your hope and starve your spirit. That kind of intolerance is healthy. It is not bitterness. It is clarity. And clarity is one of the most attractive energies a person can have because it reveals that your center is not up for negotiation. You know what you will accept. You know what you will leave. You know that the absence of effort is a message all by itself. You know that love does not need to be extracted from unwilling hands. At some point, you have to let reality be as loud as your feelings. That is the final psychological revelation here. Your feelings are real, but they're not always reliable guides. They can point to old pain, unmet needs, attachment wounds, ego, longing, loneliness, and fantasy all at once. Reality, on the other hand, is simpler. Reality shows you what people repeatedly do. Reality tells you who makes time, who initiates, who follows through, who cares enough to be clear. And once you honor reality over fantasy, your life becomes less dramatic but far more meaningful, because then you are free to invest where there is mutual interest, free to become more present in relationships that feel balanced, free to stop chasing emotional ghosts, free to build self-trust by honoring the evidence, not just the longing. That trust is priceless. The day you stop running after people who ignore you is the day you stop telling yourself that love must be earned through exhaustion. It is the day you realize that your attention is sacred. It is the day you begin to understand that the right people will not require you to abandon yourself to keep them close. And maybe that is the deepest truth of all. The people meant for your life will not make you beg for basic presents. They will not turn your peace into a negotiation. They will not leave you suspended in uncertainty while you perform emotional labor for the both of you. They will meet your effort with their own, because real connection is not one person constantly reaching while the other casually receives. So if you've been chasing someone who ignores you, let this be your turning point. Not because you suddenly became colder, not because you stopped caring, not because you decided people are disposable, but because you finally understood that your life is too valuable to keep offering it to someone who treats your presence like an option. There is strength in walking away from the wrong audience. There is dignity in ending a one-sided performance. There is peace in refusing to beg for what should have been freely given. And once you choose that peace, you do not just lose the wrong person. You gain your own life back. If this message reached you, take a second to like the video, subscribe for more psychology and self-improvement content, and comment below with your thoughts or your own experience. If you want to go deeper, watch the next video on the screen because it may reveal exactly why certain people keep pulling you in just as you try to let go.